to sort of normativized human functionality. And that's problematic, right? Because if you see someone in an inebriated state, you say that it cripples the way in which they function in the world. Therefore, we gain access to the content knowledge, the contents of their processing, and we recognize that they don't properly know, right? It's a fallacious belief that the step is this high and not that high. And then you want to say that that's where the problem relies, or inheres rather. The same conceptual critique can be directly applied to people who are autistic. And I think that that is an inappropriate application, and I think epistemologists need to reassess the functional relationship of reliability in an epistemological sense to make accommodations for members of the autistic community, and someone's got to do that research. I have no interest in doing that research. I do other things, but for people who are interested, here's a definitive way of starting to think about stuff. Right? And I mean, this is good research, right? This would be first-class research. Okay, so we recognize the senses. I just gave, and I'm actually not going to write all this down because this is way too much stuff to draw. But you look at sight, you look at first image here. You look at sight, you look at hearing, well, second image on the page, right? From the top. You look at sight, you look at hearing, you look at touch, you look at taste, you look at smell. You can consolidate that into sensory, that should be perceptual, empirical knowledge. I'm not sure what I put. Sorry. All right. Sensory, experiential, empirical knowledge. Basically, I'm going to change the diagram because I want to make it more simple. You can consolidate sight, hearing, touch, taste into our senses, right? Our senses can inform that grouping. So that when we talk about our senses, we can talk about, this is exactly what I was talking about before, right? You can take the senses and you can consolidate the individual senses, sight, hearing, taste, touch, blah, 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 into the category grouping senses. Sort of simple here. The question at the very bottom, let's skip the middle and go to the very bottom, is the relationship between the senses and reliability. Right? So I have a question mark by senses, I have a question mark by reliability, and the question then is, what is the relationship between the senses and reliability? This is exactly what I was talking about. And I guess I did have intention to make it a little bit deeper than an introductory account, because I feel that my lecture, at this point, if you're following along, you should get my grievance, right, with this conceptual approach. And it is obviously canonical. It's not a bad thing, it's not a good thing, it's just I think we need to revisit this as 21st century epistemologists, as new young epistemologists. I'm not going to just sort of spoon feed you the old dogma. What I'm going to say is, what do you really think the relationship between the consolidated, senses, as sort of senses as a category, as a grouping, and reliability, right? Well, we recognize in a very trivial sense, I mean, Descartes introduces the genie argument and the dream state argument. The Matrix has done this. Discourses on hallucination and intoxication have done this. This is a very old discourse. But there is an assumption, a huge epistemology, and that's, being a discourse on epistemology, we got to be very careful about the assumptions that we have. There's a huge assumption, which is probably potentially crippling, it's not for me to assess, that there is a proper relationship between the contents of our knowledge and its correspondence to the external world in the way we function, in the way we act. That needs to be reassessed. I'm not here to do that reassessment on the fly, but the idea is people need to do some serious conceptual thinking about this assumption, because the idea is, yes, we can talk about, in a general sense, sort of the reliability between what I think and what is, in a sort of mundane sense, but the idea is, in a much more profound sense, how is the discourse of reliability to relate to individuals who just flat out do not perceive the world like normal people do, right? What does that even mean, right? It's obviously an epistemological question. right? Because we can't access the content of the autistic person's mind per se. Neuroscience, cognitive science can. They can see things that regular people can't. But even the neuroscientists and the cognitive scientists are making epistemological functions, I think rather grievously, unfortunately, that there is a failure, operational, physiological failure in the abilities brain processing, which results in this functional disability. You know, that's the language that we have now. The question is, it's more of a challenge to young epistemologists, right? What can we do? What can the epistemologists do to offer cognitive and neuroscience a new conceptual mode of assessing autistic individuals functioning in the world based on our, what I think now is a pretty solid understanding of the interrelationship between the contents of our knowledge and its organizational structure, theoretically, and the reliability that we gain from assessing that structure with our functioning in the world. You know, what new things might we be able to add is ultimately the question. Okay, so first bullet point at the top of page 7, quote, "We have all found at one time or another that we have been misled by appearances." This is the whole sort of Malgenet argument, right? The evil genie argument, the dream argument, the matrix, the intoxication, right? All good, all well, we all understand it now. I'm still saying that there's a problem with that assessment, okay? Because the misleading point, and it's not a critique of the author, it's a critique and an analysis of the foundations of epistemology as such, is my point here. So we understand that. So read page 9, left column, explain emphasis on reliability. I think I've made it very clear, but I'll read it anyway. Okay, so this is what I want to read for you. Sort of middle of, not middle, like upper portion of the left-hand column. But perhaps we can make a sweeping negative assessment. It might seem that as soon as we have found that the senses are one of the sources of our beliefs, which I just discussed, we are immediately in the position to condemn all punitive knowledge derived from them. This is Descartes, because our senses can be misled. Thus, it can affect adversely the content knowledge of our beliefs. Some philosophers appear to have reasons in this way, and many have even supposed that Descartes is among them. The idea is that if I am assessing the reliability of my beliefs and asking whether I really know what I take myself to know, I really know what I think I know, and I come across a large class of beliefs which have come to me through the senses, I can immediately dismiss all of those beliefs as unreliable or as not amounting to knowledge because of the obvious fact that I can sometimes be wrong of my beliefs based on the senses. Right, this is what I've said, right? So the idea is you can't, you got to be careful. Some will argue that this is fact. You know, I try to remain objective in this, and I mean, I don't know, my personal belief is that that's, you know, I agree with, I'm not really sure what, I think Stroud is also trying to be objective, but I wholeheartedly disagree with the assumption that the senses, in a Cartesian sense, because we can misperceive the world based on any number of things, that undermines the reliability, right, of our content knowledge. No. I think what it does, if anything, it shows that our content knowledge isn't generalizable across all human beings. I would much more like that tone. I'm not one of those people who are aspiring to understand some human nature, some generalized principle that sort of homogenizes all of human beings. I don't like stuff like that. Me personally, I think, you know, I'm a Nietzschean. So I think the senses are the only thing that we have that are saving us. Rather than castigating and rejecting the senses, I embrace the senses personally, right? And I shouldn't be saying this in the lecture series. I should be objective, you know. But I want you to have both sides of the story. So there's a part of the story says that our senses obviously result or inform the beliefs that we have, but insofar as our senses can be misinformed for all the obvious reasons that I said a million times already, it affects our beliefs. The other approach is to say, well, our senses are our senses, and they affect our beliefs. Thus, we shouldn't try to homogenize human content knowledge exponentially across